Do you have the right people in the right positions in the right team?
What truly separates great leaders from the rest?
The minute you can outsource something, you're in a facility to do that.
We are joined by Kylee Leota. Kylee has spent over 20 years coaching CEOs, executives, and teams across Australia, helping them unlock their potential, build trust, and create what she calls unbreakable teams.
And if something's not working within your team, if you're having to step down in zone of competence and something's frustration, that's a really key indicator that something's not working over here. And you need to go back and look at your system.
This episode, we uncover the real traits that make teams thrive, how to lead through conflict and change, and why adaptability and communication is the greatest leadership tool out there.
The literate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write. It will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn.
This is The Growth Concept. Kylee, your mission is to empower leaders and teams to thrive in times of challenge by equipping them with the tools, mindset, and culture needed to pursue excellence. Why is this your mission, and why is this so important to you?
Look, to be honest, I don't know anybody that wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do a really poor job today. And I actually ask that in my workshops. I'm like, put up your hand if you laid in bed this morning and went, how can I do a terrible job in my workplace today? But the byproduct of not having the tools and, not knowing how to access the right mindset and develop this culture means that sometimes we're doing poor jobs, and poor jobs as leaders. And I think that's so particularly true of my own leadership journey. There were days where I think I was a really good leader, if I reflect, and there were days where I was probably pretty horrific, to be honest with you. And part of that was that I can acknowledge in hindsight, but the truth is I never wanted to be a bad leader. But the reality was, in Australia, like most areas, when I'm talking to people around the world, they say it's fairly similar, is that we kind of do leadership a bit arse about. We give someone a job, they're promoted on the skills that they have and the tools that they have to do their current job. But leadership requires a different set of tools. So we promote someone into this role, but we don't necessarily give them the tools and the mindset and the ability to develop the culture until after they're already in the job. And sometimes that can be like months down the track before you get the opportunity to get the training that you need. And I think for a lot of us, that means that we make mistakes along the way, that had we had this information, all these tools, we would do things differently. And so I'm really, really passionate about this particular space because I've seen some really good people not get the outcomes they wanted, including myself at times, because I didn't know any better. And when you know better, you can do better, right?
What point in your timeline, your career, your business ventures, was this mission acknowledged? When was it you were like, okay, this is my calling and purpose at this point in time?
Look, I was a really early leader. So I was promoted within my fourth year in my role. And that's in my career in education. That's very, very early. And I think for a long time, I have been a passionate helper and supporter of people my whole entire life. But I still think that can be quite dangerous at times if you don't have the tools to do it well, because you can fall into these different traps. So I think my goal and my mission came about from seeing, lots of people around me struggle. And all the people that I knew that were going into these roles were good people. Very, very few people were actually very bad people that became leaders. I think they were good people that sometimes created poor leadership. And the further I got in my career, very early on promoted, within a couple of years, I recognized that people were really struggling. And I worked in organizations where we had some really good collegiality that allowed us to do some peer mentoring and to do some hierarchical mentoring and coaching, but other organizations that were horrific and didn't give that opportunity for growth for people and didn't care that the fact that, I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast this morning where she said, leadership is one of the only positions where we don't actually naturally assume people need a coach. If you're a sports person, you couldn't even think about a football team going on the field without a coach, right? So why do we give leaders all of this power without giving them the opportunity to be coached along the way?
That's such a great point. Your business elements for success. Does this tie into your mission? Is your mission to fulfill that through your business elements for success?
Yeah, for sure. So I had a really negative association with the word success for a really long time because I grew up with the American movies that success looked like the mansion and the Lamborghini and the millions of dollars. And it just felt so out of reach for me. I couldn't even conceptually get my head around that. So it's very easy. Like you're like, well, that's out of reach. No point in trying for that. So what's the point? I had this really negative association with it. And then I came across a quote by this, I call him the OG of professional development. And his name was Earl Nightingale. And he said that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And all of a sudden, that was a game changer for me. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that means that success is available for anyone, whether whether that be personally or professionally. And then the second layer of that was that what you need, Keone, to be successful in the life that you're trying to create, that progressive realization of your worthy goal or ideal, might be different to the elements that I need. And so for me, it was around putting those pieces of the puzzle together and recognizing that one of the things that I found most frustrating about programming that, was available on the market was it was kind of a one size fits all model, and you had to kind of get on board with the program or you didn't fit. And so for me, it was recognizing that individualization in my strengths finder is one of my biggest strengths that I have, and recognizing that everyone needs different things. And so helping people bespoke and figure out what that is for them. And that whether that's an individual level, a team level, or an organization, everyone's going to need something slightly different, and that ability to bespoke those needs. So having access to a wide range of knowledge and going, oh my gosh, in this context, what do you think about this? Versus going, well, this is, the model, and everyone just needs to jam into the model there, regardless of whether or not it aligns with what you need or not.
Interesting you bring up the whole, that mental barrier you had as a leader. You were saying you got into leadership pretty early. 4 years into your career, you were already in a leadership role in education. Yep. With having this barrier of so-called success, mansions, Lamborghinis, did that tamper your leadership style at the time? And did you notice any key pivotal changes you had to make when you realized, okay, success is a lot more personal than that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things for me. One is that it was so far out of reach, the idea of being successful for me, that I kind of took it off the table. And I think that created a bit of a negative association with me being a successful person, because I just didn't think it was in my scope of ability. So even though I was being a leader and even though I was promoted, I didn't necessarily associate that with being successful. And I think so, it's my running joke that my brain is my biggest barrier in business, because whether you determine you can or determine you can't, you're usually right. So, for a long time, I determined that wasn't, something. So when people go, oh, wow, you've been promoted, congratulations on your success. I'm like, what success? That's just like, I just want to help people, and that I did it like that. So I think for me, for a long time, and, Australia has this tall poppy syndrome where we've also got a bit of a negative narrative about if I identify myself as a successful person, then people are going to try and shoot me down. And they have, who do you think you are to be promoted so early in your career? And what do you know? And all of the narrative that comes with that. And so I've had to realize, and it took me probably going through a really adverse experience to recognize that one of the things that I needed to do was have my own back. Because I had to determine my own weather, rather than, letting other people determine my mood based on what they thought about me at different points in my career.
That's such a great point. Let's talk about leadership. As you were saying, it's a bit of a buzzword in 2025, leadership. And with coming out of school, leadership was something I haven't really heard of, but as I've obviously adventured into the media space, podcasting business, it's a word that's come up heaps. Then there's a lot of leadership courses out there, develop this, develop that, seeing different leadership styles in my own work, home life even. But there's so many different definitions of leadership. The Oxford definition of leadership is the action of leading a group of people or an organization. And I read that and I'm like, that's very bland. It's a blank canvas, really. What is your personal definition of leadership in 2025?
Well, I think it's about taking, Brene Brown talks about this idea of seeing the potential in others and developing that full potential. But I think added to that is we have to actually see the potential in ourselves, because I believe that in order to lead others, you've got to first lead yourself. And in order to lead yourself, you've got to know yourself. So my definition of leadership encompasses that seeing potential in yourself and developing that capability and competency within that, as well as seeing the potential in others and taking responsibility for developing that in others. Again, individually, team, organizationally.
So does that mean the foundation of leadership is first work on yourself?
Oh, yes, 100%. Full stop, exclamation mark.
100%.
Every leader. Any problem starts with you. That's usually how it works, including myself at times. Yeah. For sure.
What process you were saying that you obviously had this mental barrier of what success was for you. So if I'm a young individual wanting to level up my leadership and I don't know where to start, work on yourself is very bland again. Where do we even start with that?
Broad. It's so broad, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, I think there's this concept, the Japanese call it Kaizen, the continuous improvement. And so first of all, you actually have to be open to the fact that, and I think there's a bit of a paradox here, because we sit there and say that if you continue to keep looking over there, you're never really self-fulfilled because you're always looking somewhere else. So I think you have to equally be okay with where you are right now, but recognize that tomorrow you can do better. So I think there's a bit of a paradox there around accepting where you are right now and not judging that. You are where you are, and that's where but also recognizing, and, the All Blacks, if you're a rugby fan, talk about leaving the jersey in a better condition in which you received it. So the opportunity to, leave this world, leave this relationship, leave whatever in a better condition because of your existence in it, I think is really, really great. And I agree, there's so much information out there. And I think that was my own trouble as well, is that I was trying to apply everything that I ever read, and I'm a bit of a nerd. So there was lots of stuff I was reading. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm applying this. And I just felt like I was kind of spinning my wheels all the time and not really getting anywhere. And so what I did is I created my own framework, and the model is called Infinite. And each of those letters stands for its own pillar. And the reason, I think of infinite, if you think of the infinite symbol, it's always ongoing. And I think of it as a bit of an evolution of self all the time. So it aligns with that continuous improvement model. And the first pillar of Infinite is identity. Who am I right now? And what do I aspire to be? And what are my values? And how does that show up in my behaviors? And the last pillar of Infinite is ecosystem. Who am I surrounding myself with? And are they supporting me in that alignment of identity? So it comes sort of full circle back. And within that, there's these other pillars. So we've got nurturing, which is about emotional intelligence, fearlessness, innovation, nobility, influence, transformation, and ecosystem. And for the big picture visionary people, they can actually take all the pillars of Infinite and look at it as a whole. And for those that need to just focus on one thing right now, they could pick any one of those pillars and continue to evolve their self and their own leadership, and then the leadership of others by picking that pillar. And I always encourage people to start with identity, because who you are determines how you lead, and where you are right now in your journey. And if you're not aware of that, you are just leading the blind all of the time.
100%.
So, and it also determines who you spend your time with. And, it allows us, if we don't understand who we are, then it allows us to fall into the trap of victimhood, of blaming others all the time for our decisions or indecisions about where we are or where we are not in our own leadership journey. So, I recognize that for me, I'm not the same person I was before when I was in education to who I am as a business person. My identity has changed. Who I was in the first year of my business to who I am in this year of my business, my identity has changed. So the ongoing evolution for me is to keep revisiting that identity piece and not thinking it as set in stone so much. And Vusi Thembekwayo, he's an African entrepreneur. He said, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed, which means if you don't like who you are, You've got the power to change it. And so often we give our power to away to other people. And so, I often talk to my clients around, are you being the author of your own story or the character in somebody else's?
With this framework of infinity of this leadership style, do you find that in this day and age, it seems to be more a destination? Oh, once I've gotten that role, I'm now a leader and there's no room to work and improve. Do you personally see that?
I talk all the time in my workshops about, I don't ever want this to be this really cool thing that we did once. And I think leadership can be a bit the same. Like you go to a course, wow, I'm just, it's this really cool thing that I did once, and I apply that. And then we're not a one-stop shop. In order to be a better leader, if I was the same person I was 5 years ago, I'd actually be really scared because life is moving at such a fast pace. What I needed to do now and show up as a leader is very different to what I needed to do 5 years ago. And the people that are struggling in leadership are the ones that are having the trouble being agile in their thinking around that. And they're having trouble with being that flexibility because they want to die on the hill of their belief system. And Adam Grant talks about this concept of think again. So you may have this idea and then that might be true for you in this moment, but 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the track, you might get some other information that means that idea may not work anymore. So you've got two options. You can let the ego in the driver's seat that says, I'm going to die on the hill of this belief system because I've put this belief system out there. Or I can have this evolution of my thought process and go, oh my gosh, I did think this then, but now I've learned some more information. I actually recognize that this iteration is actually better. And I'm humble enough to recognize that I could do better with this new information.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that we struggle. And that's the N part, the second N in infinite is this concept of nobility is around checking our ego at the door, understanding the difference between humility and arrogance, and also, not passing judgment and being in the service of others. Because when we serve others, we in turn serve ourselves and we get better outcomes for everyone.
We were talking about the fact that there's a lot of generations in the workforce now, up to 5 generations, we were saying. Does this leadership framework involve all of these generations? Is it the same for each generation's style? It's not.
Well, so the overarching concept of infinite is true, right? But you have to understand your identity, whichever generation you're in, which underpins your needs in terms of communication preferences, in terms of conflict resolution style, in terms of moving the momentum forward in the organization. And then the power piece is in the influence part, which where we create psychological safety and communication strategies to navigate cross-generationally to get everybody's needs met, because the goal is the win-win for everyone. Exactly. And I'm coaching a 60-year-old leader, CEO of an organization at the moment, who currently has 18-year-olds in his workplace, right? So my generation, I'm a Gen Xer. Thanks very much. Proud Gen Xer. We grew up on fear-based parenting, fear-based leadership. I can remember, my upbringing as most Gen Xers is, do this or else. And that was what we got in the workplace. It was what we got at home. And so that doesn't work for Gen Y. It doesn't work for Gen Zs, and it doesn't work for Gen Alpha. I have both of those in my children. It doesn't work as a strategy. And just for the record, Gen X has raised Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, right? So we can't sit there and go, oh my gosh, this generation. Well, we created them, right? And we did that because we didn't like being raised on fear. We didn't like that top-down hierarchical, do as I say, not as I do model of parenting or leadership. So we made a conscious decision to do it differently. And it's a lot more work to have conversations and explain the why and sit down and find that connection. But the outcomes are better. But you also just have to understand the different generations, and what one person might need is different to what another person might need. And I think that's part of the leadership evolution as well.
Yeah, 100%. Especially with being exposed to all different sorts of leadership styles, personalities in the workforce, older, younger. It's really interesting seeing the leadership approach with different people, their perspective on things. Like some people, it's very blunt and harsh, and what they say in an email or text comes across completely wrong to if you're going to have that face-to-face interaction. Obviously, being a Gen Z myself, we're all on the media, we're all on the phones, and we're influenced a lot by that. What key mistakes do you see being made in modern leadership to the generations coming into the workforce, and what do you think businesses need to implement to be more adaptable or open-minded to different young people's perspectives?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So one is there are still leaders that think it's a one-size-fits-all model, and that everyone needs to fit into the puzzle versus understanding that everyone's a bit different. I think the secondary part of that is the fact that that we need to understand. A key part is I don't think people understand themselves very well. On TikTok, I call it diagnosis by TikTok. Where people watch all this information and go, oh my God, that's me. And, this whole concept of I'm allowed to feel my feels, which is a very TikTok narrative around, well, I'm understanding my emotions. Fantastic. It's still not okay for you to lose your shizzle at work, right? You're allowed to feel your feelings. So I'm not saying you can't, but context is still important. The management of that emotion is still important. But I think there's a bit of a disconnect there of understanding what that actually means. I think, so first of all, we have to understand ourselves, and then we have to understand that other people are going to think like us. I don't necessarily have the same motivational drivers that you do. And that's great, because the best teams, the most highly performing teams, and the most effective teams are the most diverse teams. Exactly. Diverse in age, diverse in culture, diverse in thinking. The problem with that is that we don't create agreements around how to communicate those differences. So we tend to personalize. When someone says, oh, Keone, I don't think that's a great idea. Sometimes Gen Zs and Gen Alphas get very offended by that. But if we create a safe space, and this is where I believe foundationally, we have to create safe spaces for brave and courageous conversations, which is an underpinning of psychological safety. And I think if we get that right, you would know, Keone, if I say to you, hey, Keone, I don't think that's the best idea, that you know that I'm coming from a place of love and care, as opposed to punitive, I don't care about you and I don't care what you think, right? So if we've got that underpinning, that foundation right, you're going to receive that with the intention it was given, as opposed to creating a different assumption about what my intention was in that situation.
Such an important point for obviously older leaders adapting younger crew onto their team organization. But as a young individual being entered into the workforce, and these more experienced leaders and developed people, in my view, it's my way or the highway. There's not enough room for adaptability for, this new person seems to be X. Let's have a chat with them and just see where it goes. What should we know now to fit in to the modern leadership style that people may not want to adapt to the younger generations coming through?
So there's a really great quote by a guy called Alvin Toffler, and he said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write. It will be those that cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And what he means by that is exactly what you're talking about, those leaders that can't understand that there might be a different way of working.
Yeah.
And I think the other part for young Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, if you can find it in your heart to have a little bit of grace to understand that if you've been doing something for 50 years, it's a little bit harder for you to unlearn that behavior than it is if you've been doing it for 18 years, right? 100%. So it's not to say that people don't want to do things differently. It's that maybe they don't have a support network. And this is why I fundamentally believe one of the problems in leadership is that we are not supported as leaders to unpack our thoughts and our feelings in a safe space. So we have verbal diarrhea on the people around us. And and that came from my own experience as a leader. I didn't want my leaders to know that I was struggling, and I did not want my team to know that I was struggling. So where did I go to process that information? And if I didn't have anywhere to go, it just built up and built up and built until it spewed on somebody else. And I have seen some really great leaders lose it in very unfortunate circumstances and break trust, break respect, and it is much harder to get it back once you've smashed that marble jar of trust than it is to actually have a safe space to go, well, I'm really frustrated by this. Cool. Now what do we do? So acknowledge and validate. Yep, that's really frustrating when people don't think the same way. Now what? What are we going to do about that? Now, everyone needs a safe space to unpack that,
100%.
as opposed to on your team. So I think it would be really great if Gen Zers could it's not about accepting, and it's not about condoning inappropriate behavior in any way, shape or form. But I think for Gen Zers that are, and Gen Alphas that are sort of, and this is where we've got to understand, you're actually managing up. We think of leadership as a top-down kind of concept, but leading is also bottom-up. So you are a leader no matter where you are in the organization. So how you show up, how you model, and how you handle, inappropriate behavior. So if you can stay grounded in those circumstances versus you having a same amount of emotional dysregulation as the person who's supposed to be your leader, if you can stay grounded in that, then you're going to get much further. And this is about being really clear. And, some things I've done in my leadership is where I've felt really, really stuck with my leader top down doing things that I don't think are okay, is actually going, well, can you help me understand what you would like the priority to be? Because I might view that differently to you, and I want to make sure that we're in alignment. Right? Because if I would sit there, I'm a people-focused person. So I'll always put people over the policy. And if you've got a policy leader that likes processes and systems, they often put the system over the people, right? So I have had misalignment with leaders over the years because we just have different priorities. And that has gotten me in trouble on more than one occasion. So one of the things that I learned was actually going, well, instead of going what I think is right, I would actually check in and say, hey, you're solution focused. So you're going, hey, look, these are the 3 tasks that you've given me. The way that I would prioritize them would be A, B, and C because of whatever reasons. I just want to check in that's in alignment with your perspective on your prioritization. Now, you've just led that conversation, even though you're not the leader, right?
Yeah, that's such a good way of bringing open-mindedness to the table for different perspectives. As a young individual and venturing into business, building a team for myself, and dealing with a lot more older people that have run their corporations and businesses for a while and that have their leadership style. As a young person adventuring into these fields, what should I know about leadership that will help me get more clients or get more business or build a more of a unshakable team in my organization?
Yeah, so I think the very first thing that I would say to you is get clear what done looks like. And so I'm a bit of a Brené Brown fan. So if you're listening back to this podcast, you'll hear a lot of those things. One of the things that I think underpins the organization's success or failure is everybody has to be on the same page about what you're working towards. Exactly. So, and I think sometimes the youth can assume that as the adults or the older people who have more experience that we actually know all of the things and assume that we will have all this stuff in place. But I think as a young person, but also, you think one way, I might think a different way. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that we think differently. So the only way to know that is to get on the same page about what we're working towards. Right. So, there's a saying that says begin with the end in mind. So what are we working towards? What's the outcome we're hoping to achieve? So do we all have clarity on what that vision is? Right. I'm wanting to build a $10 million business with one-to-one coaching or whatever that is for you. Is everybody in your team on the same page about what we're working on here? Right. So let's get that. Then do we have the systems in place to manage it? And whilst I'm not a systems person, I understand the needs for systems because we rise or fall to the level of our systems. And if something is falling down and something is not working, you can usually backtrack it to somewhere over here. There's a system and there's not been a clear line of communication somewhere along the line. The second part is surround yourself with people. So create a psychologically safe environment where you encourage people to challenge you for the betterment of the outcome. Right? So if you've got people that are yes people that are only just going to go, oh, yes, Kearney. Oh, that's a great idea. Yes, Kearney. That's a no. You're going to end up spinning your tail and you're not going to spend lots of money on things that don't work because some of your ideas are actually going to be crap. I hate to tell you, not everything is gold, right? And I've had to learn that myself when, I get really excited about an idea and I've had to employ people that are like, so Kylee, I just need you to work that back with me. And then I'm like, So I think you need to surround yourself with people that I like to call the loving critics. So Tasha Eurich has this concept that talks about there's 3 types of people that can give you feedback. One is the unloving critic. They are the people that are going to find fault in everything that you do. And some of those older leaders who think that rewarding or giving someone compliments about their work will make them lazy or, all that kind of stuff, they sometimes fall into that category. Sometimes it can be a family member. Sometimes it can be our friend. There's always those people that are going to be the unloving critics.
Yeah.
The second person is the uncritical lover, the person that thinks that your shit doesn't stink, and they're going to think that everything that you do is gold. And Kearney's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go take that guy out. And they're like, yeah, they must deserve it. They're not helpful either. Right? So the loving critic are the people that are going to be your champions. They are absolutely 100% going to believe in you, but they're also going to challenge your thought process because of that, because they want you to be the best version of yourself. And if they're not sure that this decision or where you're going is going to allow you to be the best version of yourself, they're going to check on you and ask you. They're also going to be your biggest fans and supporters. They're going to cheer you along the way, but they're equally going to check you at the door if they think there's something not in alignment with who you are and where you want to go.
Selling the dream. How important is this when developing a team? I've heard Ed Milet talks about it a fair bit. Do you know Ed Milet?
Yeah, I love Ed Milet.
Amazing
One of my favorite
guy.
people. Yeah.
He talks a lot about selling the dream of your business, organization, non-for-profit, whatever you're doing. Sell them the mission, the dream. Have that as the foundation. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, or would you twist it up a bit?
No, so I agree. I think particularly for Gen Z and Gen Alpha,
yes,
purpose and why is absolutely the way to get buy-in. Just do this thing here is not going to get buy-in from those team members. Back in our generation, you did as you're told and you didn't question it because it was seen as disrespectful. So therefore, we were more likely to go along with stuff unless it was horrific. We were less likely to challenge things. So for Gen Z and Gen Alpha in particular, they want to know why that's so important to the organization. And Simon Sinek has Know Your Why. And I think, when you can connect to purpose, you get this feeling that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And that inspires Gen Z and Gen Alpha in particular, and even millennial, as a generation, which I think are kind of a bit of a forgotten generation. We've kind of gone to Gen X to Gen Y, but and Gen Z, we've kind of skipped over this millennial idea. They've kind of just disappeared into the ether, but they're a big part of our organizations as well, right? So we've actually got to understand that that's really important to people. And I think, I sat down yesterday. I did a planning day on Friday where I was connecting for my next quarter goals. And I think one of the things that I have been struggling with is I have been so busy that I lost a little bit of clarity. So on Friday, sat down and allocated my time, put it in your calendar because it won't happen otherwise.
Exactly.
Secondly, I then marinated on it over the weekend, just mulled around. I was doing different things and it was kind of in the back of my head. And last night I was able to sit down and come up with my focus goal with 10 goals I wanted to achieve between now and the 23rd of December, which is 79 days away. I was able to give that to my team. And so they had a really strong sense of purpose and direction, which then makes them more efficient because now they're not waiting for me to guide them each step of the way. They know what the bigger vision is. And also they will have more input. I will have one idea on that we're going to achieve that goal, but they will also have their own inputs and value to add to the thing. And between all of us, we'll come up with a plan that's going to move us forward. And even if we don't get to my BHAG, my big, hairy, audacious goal that I've set for myself between now and the end of the quarter, I'm going to get far further than I have than sitting there going, what am I going to focus on this week? What am I going to focus on today? Oh my gosh, what do I need to do? Right? So we need to have a plan. And I think the other part of it too is having clarity in a plan that we're working towards actually gives us flexibility in our thinking. Because if we know where we're going, we don't need to think about that anymore. That's where we're going to. We don't actually then we've got room in our brain, because decision-making fatigue is real. If you've got to wake up every morning and decide what you're going to do today to move your business forward, then you're going to get fatigued over like little innocuous decisions that you have to make every day. If you have a plan making forward and you've got some real clarity around that, then a lot of that decision-making fatigue will be taken off you because you know where you're going. So then you can then take that, cognitive load that you've had and redirect it to somewhere that's more meaningful and purposeful for you in this particular moment.
We spoke about diversity of
yes,
your team organization, which is so crucial. But do the qualities of the overall leadership approach need to shift depending on the generation and team you are working with? For example, with baby boomers, comparing them to the Gen Z and Gen A coming through now. Because, selling the dream may work for one generation, but obviously when you have the younger generation being like, why am I doing this? What's the point? Like, for example, I heard on Channel 9 News the other day, it was like telling a Gen Z or Gen A to go get a job is classed as an insult.
Yep.
Like, now we're dealing with a whole perspective of these different qualities in leadership. What qualities should we be seeking out for?
Well, I think the truth is, I don't know anybody that doesn't want to be seen, heard, valued, and accepted, right? I think all of us do, and we all want to belong somewhere. We want to feel like we belong in this particular space. I think where it goes, so I think that's universal. I don't think that's a generational thing. I think that's
I agree.
all of us.
Yeah.
I think the variance is what it looks like for us to feel seen and heard and valued and accepted looks and sounds and feels different. So the person that's told that getting a job is an insult is around what is it that you want to do in your life and how can we help you achieve it? As opposed to the more direct version that sometimes Gen X and baby boomers actually appreciate is, hey, this is our mission focus. We've just got to get on with it. Do you need anything? Let me know. Right? So, and that comes with, I'm going to get on my little soapbox for a little minute, if that's okay.
100%.
But this concept of micromanagement, right? So absolutely, we know that research tells us that micromanagement is a bad thing to do. What I would argue is that what micromanagement looks like for one person looks different for another person.
Sorry to butt in, but micromanagement, is that adjusting small, minute things of an approach?
Yeah, so micromanagement can be seen as needing to be a decision maker at every single step. It can be seen as checking in on what you need to do. It can be seen as nothing gets, unless it's approved by you, nothing gets through kind of concept, right? But if you've got a high desire for autonomy, which means to be left alone to do your task and to be trusted that you're going to do it well. Me coming in and saying, Keone, how's your day going? What have you got on today? Which I might think might be connection seeking, might be seen as micromanagement. Whereas Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like, oh my gosh, they cared about what I was doing today. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we have to be really mindful when we get these broad sweeping terms about micromanagers is bad, because the default of that is that some people can feel left to their own devices without any guidance and they can feel really unsupported. So, but you might be somebody who needs somebody to check in on you, for you to feel loved, valued, seen, heard, and accepted. You also, there might be the person next to you that if someone says to you, hey, at the beginning of the week on Monday, hey, Keone, what have you got on your agenda for this week? And then you do this broad overview and now you just go, leave me alone to do it. That actually might be that way that person might feel seen and heard because they feel trusted that they can do that without that check-in. But we've just got this concept that it's a bad thing to do. And I think that's one of the things, the narrative that's going to change in the next few years is because the older generations have really laser focus on micromanagement as bad. I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha feel unseen if people aren't checking on them to see how they are and how they're doing. And I think there's going to be a bit of a paradox there because people will think they're trying not to micromanage when Gen Z and Gen Alpha will see it as unsupported. And I think we have to be really mindful about what does that conversation, and I think the conversation is, hey, I want you to feel seen, valued, and accepted and belong in our organization. What does that look like for you?
I love that.
Instead of just assuming that your style is going to work for everybody.
I think the big challenge I'm seeing in society for us at the moment is there are so many generations in this workforce, and there's so many different styles, and leadership, as we were talking about, is this big umbrella that, you got to fit into it. But it's actually sitting down. What are your goals? What are your outcomes that we can help fulfill? I think, but obviously that then you got to tailor that to people that need that. Here's what you got to get done. Do it. But it's making this a judgment quickly, which comes with diversity. We're touching on diversity in your group or organization. We were talking about having someone who challenges your perspectives, someone that all the qualities are, which you got to believe in the dream, this vision you're working towards, which I love, totally agree with. But when I'm choosing my team in my small business, what key things do I need to consider in this diversity progress? Yes, challenge someone with a different opinion, belief than me is great. But what other perspectives do you feel is very valid in this day and age with the rapid of change increasing so much?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One, you need someone with good communication skills. And I think that's expressive communication and receptive communication. I think somebody with their own continuous improvement agenda, that they want to be better than they were the day before, because that means that they're going to be more open to feedback and accountability. I think the other part of that too is understanding that all of us operate, we have a zone of genius, we have a zone of competence, and we have a zone of frustration. And our zone of genius is the things that we can do where 5 hours feels like 5 minutes. We come away energized from the task, and it just fulfills it. For me, it's things where I can connect with people like yourself.
Exactly.
Sitting down, doing a podcast, speaking, doing workshops, all of those kind of things, right? Can I do other stuff? Absolutely. But your zone of competence stuff is the stuff that you do well. But if you spend an inordinate amount of time in it, you start to fatigue and you start to not show up as your best self. And that can show up as resentment. And your zone of frustration are the tasks that 5 minutes feels like 5 hours. So in a business context, from my own perspective, I hate reconciling my books. I just hate zone of frustration for me. I will sit and I will fluff around and I will procrastinate. And because I don't like it, it tends to be a task that I drag it out, right? So one of the things that I did when I employed my bookkeeper, her words to me was, I love reconciling. Excellent. Her zone of genius was my zone of frustration. Excellent. What we needed, though, was high-level communication skills so that she could do her job and live in her zone of genius, which gave me time back to live in mine. Winning, right? I think the second part of that is understanding what is your zone of genius, which is your zone versus your zone of competence. So I was coaching a very amazing colleague of mine, and he was in this organization, and he had been brought on board into this organization to really implement some really firm changes into the organization. So he was a change agent, but he really needed to steer the ship, and that required him being quite directive at that particular time, and kind of like the follow the leader type thing, because the organization needed that in that moment. And I was having a chat with him one day, and he was feeling quite burnt out, and he was feeling really quite stressed about things. And his boss had a conversation with him about this book called Surrounded by Idiots, where they talk about different colors of leadership style. So she talked to him about the fact that, maybe even though he was a red leader, that maybe that wasn't working now, And I remember pausing, and I remember sitting there, and in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I need to quit my job. And I'm like, because I don't see him as a red leader at all. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe I'm terrible at this coaching gig. Like, maybe I need to question myself. Anyway, went away. I knew the concept of the book because it's very similar to the concept of DISC. If people aren't familiar with those different personality styles, they're often quite similar. Anyway, I went away, bought the book, read it, and I'm like, still don't experience you like this. So I went back to him and I said to him, do you think maybe the challenge is that when they brought you on board, they needed you to be a red, and that's zone of competence for you? But the reason that you're burnt out and fatigued is you're not a red. You're actually a yellow, and yellow is your zone of genius. And the reason that you're so tired is because you're not leaning into your zone of genius so much. Anyway, fast forward, he went back, had a conversation with his boss. Within 2 months, the whole thing had flipped on its head and he was loving his job, he was fulfilled, and his cup was filled up, right?
Wow.
And it was really about the fact that he had been, and it's very easy to get caught up in your zone of competence because you can do it well. So
Exactly.
It's a natural default you fall back into. So once you find people whose zone of genius is your zone of frustration, you need people that zone of genius is your zone of competence, so you don't have to carry it all by yourself all of the time. Because the goal is that I would love to think that 80% of my day, of my month, is in the zone of genius. 10% is zone of competence, and 10% is zone of frustration, right? Now, I think most of us, if anyone did an audit of what they were doing, particularly if you're just starting a business, I would say that probably 80% of what you're doing is in your zone of competence, or maybe even 60% zone of competence, 30% zone of frustration, and 10% in your zone of genius. And that's why you're so exhausted. So we really need to flip the script. First of all, figure it out what it is. Figure out what you need to do, what systems you need in place to get there. And then 3, onboard people that their zone of genius fulfills those other areas for you. And then the last piece of that, to wrap it in a nice little bow, is have really great communication skills so that the person whose zone of genius, if you're playing in your zone of frustration, they can turn around and say to you, hey, I love you, but get out of my lane. This is my zone of genius, right? Go back to your zone of genius. Because if you'll keep defaulting down to your zone of competence and zone of frustration, as a leader, that is often because you feel uncertain about what's going on there, that it's not done right. And I think that's a bit of a dangerous place to be. So we want to be able to flip that script so that we're in our zone of genius. And I think we need to audit it regularly. What am I doing well? How can I do more? What's not working well? What do I need to change, reduce, or eliminate? Without judgment.
Yeah, it goes back to that identity stage on discovering your leadership style. I truly am fascinated by visually seeing these zones. It's something I've never heard of this concept before, but
oh wow,
yeah, it's amazing, and I look forward to applying this. So obviously, each person, as you know yourself, whether you're a startup in your career, everyone's going to have their 3 stages. Zone of genius, where 5 hours feels like 5 minutes. Pursue that; that's your thing. But there's also going to be zone of frustration. And this is where you'd be like, okay, I need that diversity and find someone who can fill this zone of frustration within this organization or this end goal. But then the competence is, I can do it, but it's not too bad. But do you outsource that? Find someone who your zone of competence can kind of be there?
I think the key to that is the fact that, zone of competence is stuff that you can do really, really well. But if you spend too long in it, it fatigues you and you become resentful. So think about those tasks that you do, that you can do them. Like, it's very easy for you to just pick them up and just run with them. But if you spend too long in them, like if I spend 6 months doing only this particular type of work, I become pretty cranky and pretty irritable because I'm not getting any time in my zone of genius, right? So you do want to bring people on board that can step up, and that's their zone of genius, so that you can support if you need to, or if they're away, you can step into stuff. But and it's their zone of genius, and this is where you've got the complementary strengths, right? So I love my previous admin, who's just moved on to a different role, and I've got a new admin. She loves, her zone of genius is behind the scenes. She does not want to speak on a phone. She does not want to, but she will love and spend all of her time in Canva. That's great for her. I hate Canva. Hate it. I get it. I get that I need it. It's important. I have it. But if I have to go edit a Canva document, there are words coming out that you don't want to, like, you're not going to play on this podcast, right?
Yep.
I can do it. It's zone of competence down to zone of frustration stuff, right?
Yeah.
But she was great because she loved it. It was absolutely her jam, right? But when I was onboarding new people, I needed some different things. I needed people that were willing to get on the phone, because that was the part, again, zone of competence for me, but also fatiguing, because I want to be delivering the workshop. I want to be writing the book. I want to be speaking on the stage. I don't want to be doing all of this back end part when I can employ people that can do that for me, that allow me to spend all my time over here. Because if I've got to do 15 hours a day, 14 of them, I want to be doing zone of genius stuff, right?
100%.
Because 15 hours a day, if I can spend 14 in my zone of genius, do you know what happens after that? I'm not tired. If I'm spending 15 hours a day in my zone of frustration, I am going to want to poke my eyeball out with a fork. So and as you're building in business, you're going to be doing all of the things. So if you're a young entrepreneur or a young business owner, you are going to be doing all of them.
Yeah.
But you need to work out zone of genius, zone of competence, zone of frustration. And because the minute you can outsource something, you're in a facility to do that, start those zone of frustration tasks. They're the first things that you delegate. Get them off.
I love that.
So that you can spend more time up here. So now you're in your zone of competence and your zone of genius. Then the next thing you're delegating is the things that frustrate you if you spend too much time in it. So now you've got more time in your zone of genius. And if something's not working within your team, if you're having to step down in zone of competence and zone of frustration, that's a really key indicator that something's not working over here. And you need to go back and look at your system. And do you have the right people in the right positions in the right team helping you grow your business where you need to go? And that's where that visionary piece all comes back into play.
And this comes with that diversity of your team. Such a great point. I wish I heard this conversation before I started my startup. It's like I was trying to delegate all these tasks. It's only now I'm starting to like outsource things and team up with people, sell the dream, sell the passion, team up with them with the same passion, but different perspectives. I think that point is so, so valid in this day and age. Kylee, the last guest I interviewed on the podcast left a question for you, not knowing who you were, what business or venture or mission you stand for. The question is, based on how the world is right now, if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
I think circling back to what I said at the beginning of the episode was that nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do a bad job today. And so I think if we could understand and give the world a little bit more grace, that people are doing the very best they can with what they have, I think that would make the world a better place. And I do think that also that understanding behavior is not condoning it, right? So understanding there's a difference between intention and impact, and understanding we want alignment between intention and impact. And often there's this misalignment. So if we can go back and have the grace to go, right, this is the impact for me from what happened. I'm just wondering if that was your intention.
As we were talking about with the different leadership styles, no one wakes up and being like, I want to do the worst job today. It's, you know what you know. And when there's so much change happening all at once, it's hard to keep up. It's hard to adapt, grow as an organization and team for the new upcoming leaders to adapt and suit for them as well. For the next guest I interview on this podcast, what question do you want to leave them, not knowing what business they're in, what they stand for, or their mission?
Yeah, so I guess my underlying premise is you have to lead yourself before you lead others. And I think too often we're focused on what's out here and we forget to start in here. So my question is, what are 3 things that you do to lead yourself every single day?
I love that. Kylee Leota, if you could go back to your younger self with the leadership knowledge you have now, what would you tell yourself and why?
Yeah, so Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Eat, Pray, Love. And she talks about this story where she was going through this really awful experience. And she said, I remembered in a moment that I saw myself as a friend. And I think for me, it would be around the fact that if our self-narrative is always way harsher than we'd ever say to a friend. So if I was, if I made a mistake or something, the conversation I have with myself is awful compared to if my friend made that same mistake, what would I say to them? And I think that we forget sometimes to see ourselves as a friend, and going back to that grace comment and give ourselves some grace the same way that we give others. So my advice to my younger self would be 1, see myself as a friend and think about that as if I was talking to a friend that was going through that, what would I say to them? What advice would I give them? As opposed to the flogging that I am giving myself right now for making a mistake.
Yeah.
And the second one would be, how can I give myself and others grace?
I love that. Just a simple change of perspective can have a whole different trajectory of meaning. Such a valuable point. Kylee Leota, thank you so much for this conversation. And the main point I've gotten from this is the importance of diversity in your team organization and being open-minded to no one wakes up with the intention to do the worst job. And it's okay to not have everything figured out and simply being open-minded to change. I think that's such a valuable point, which a lot of leaders can take on these days, as well as myself. Kylee Leota, thank you so much for coming on to The Growth Concept.
Keone, it has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I really appreciate the platform to share these ideas, and hopefully they will